the healthiest thing to do in life then is to integrate with, the complete picture of who you are. And then once you've integrated, go back and decide where you're going to go. Am I going to go live in my astral house? Am I going to go to a different planet? Am I going to go in this upper plane? Am I going to, play basketball down in astral Los Angeles? Like, you decide what you want to do, but after you integrated yourself, so you're not like all these amnesic pieces of yourself all over the place. Is that right?
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, we can't control what happens in our physical life, but unless you do meditation or you see mediums, there are mediums that can actually help you reintegrate. Truth be told, in a way, we're fragmented. We often have lots of past life fragments that need to be retrieved to make us whole again. So it may not even be in this lifetime that's causing us problems. Integration is cool, but we always retain our identity. So that's a great way to summarize.
Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. On today's show, we have a really interesting guest for you guys, which is Dr. Michael Lee. I found Michael on the Afterlife Topics forum, and I was very intrigued by his story and what he had to say. So he is actually a scientist in fields like quantum chemistry and machine learning, and by night, he is an out-of-body explorer, self-described mystic. So we're looking at another really cool example of sort of the hard sciences meets the more non-materialist side of science, which these are both, in my opinion, scientific modes of exploration. But Dr. Lee is a really cool example of combining both of these things together. So without further ado, hey, Michael, how's it going?
Hi, Cyrus. Nice to meet you.
And what part of the world are you in right now?
I'm in Maryland.
Maryland, right on. Okay. So, I guess let's just jump into it a little bit. Michael, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and so we can kind of have a place to get started? So you're quite, proficient in the material sciences, and then how did this evolve into things like out-of-body experiences?
So I did a very traditional career, and originally my parents wanted me to be a medical doctor, but I really got sucked into computational chemistry, which is really cool. And it's sort of a method that one can use to, say, find new drugs or new medicines. So I was really excited about that. So I went to graduate school at UC Berkeley. I got a degree in what I call quantum chemistry or physical chemistry. I then did a postdoc at Scripps Research Institute, where I got to then start modeling proteins. Crazy stuff. And then my career began continuing sort of that work that I did as a postdoc, developing molecules that could be used as potential drug candidates against infectious diseases. Lots of cool stuff. The last few years, that particular money dried up for me, so I kind of switched over to a new area for myself called machine learning, which is very hot right now. It's basically getting computers to do the things that we do and even do things better than what we can do. And it's a really hot field right now. If you've seen, the latest games of chess that can beat all the humans and only takes a few hours for it to learn, to what else? Oh yeah, so there's a new controversial use of machine learning where you put in a title sentence and then it spits out a paragraph defending that sentence. So you could say something like, blah, 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 politician is the greatest person, and then a whole paragraph describing and that topic sentence and doing it in a way that sounds like a human wrote it. So there's just some really crazy stuff. And of course, self-driving cars is another area where machine learning is really hot. So that's sort of what I've been doing in the physical world. in the spiritual world, about 20 years ago, I suffered from, I like to tell everybody, you know, I suffered from a terrible fear of death. I'm sure a lot of your fans understand that. You know, they just want answers. And I got lucky. There was a show on the Sci-Fi Channel, John Edward, Crossing Over. I started watching that show. I don't know if that's, you know, something you guys talk about, mediums.
Yeah, yeah.
And I got super excited about that show. I read his first book, which was actually written before he became famous. And that was just that tipping point for me where I was like, well, either, you know, he's fooling himself, he's fooling us, or it's real. And, you know, once I went down that road, one of the very first things I discovered online was out-of-body experiences. And that was really cool because that would then be an opportunity for me to personally experience the afterlife. I started practicing that for a few months. I was very lucky. I know people that have been practicing out-of-body or trying to do out-of-body experiences for years and years. After about 2 months, things started kicking in. One of the main things, main secrets that I can relate to your audience about my success with astral projection is that I use the route of lucid dreaming. So, you know, for some people, the best thing to do is to do these meditation exercises, and then suddenly you'll find yourself in a sort of mind awake, body asleep state. But for me, I found the best way to get these things going was basically I was asleep and I would realize that I was dreaming. I would say, okay, I want to go out of body, which was kind of a circuitous way of achieving what I wanted to achieve. But eventually I realized that from the lucid dream state, I could enter into the spirit world. And specifically the way that I did that, that's really key, is that I asked to do something called retrievals. And I don't know, are you familiar with spirit retrievals? That kind of
Possibly. Like, you can fill us in though.
All right, so I picked up the concept of soul retrievals from Bruce Moen. He wrote a series of books where he went to the Monroe Institute, and I think the second week long class was in trying to do retrievals. A retrieval is where we in the physical descend into the astral planes, meet up with one or more spirits, fragments of personalities of people that have just passed away, or heck, it could have been 100 years ago that that person passed away. And then initially, the most simplest thing that you can do is simply just communicate with that spirit for a little bit. Why does this even happen to begin with? Well, it turns out that unlike the other spirits that are trying to help out, which we call helpers, humans, when we project, actually shine very bright in the astral. And so through this method, we can go into the astral realm. Of course, we request to do a retrieval. And then the spirit that needs to be retrieved sees us. We can communicate them, can sort of wake them up, so to speak. And then a helper who's nearby can then step in and finish the exercise and help the spirit then move forward.
And what is it about them that is like, well, there's a few different thoughts running in my head at once. And I know about Bruce Moen and retrievals. It's just not even as somebody who does astral projection, I mean, I think maybe I've done some similar things as this, but the question on my mind is, in what way do they need help, and in what condition are they in? Because when I am aware of people on that side who are a little bit, shall we say, stuck, it's usually the kind of near Earth astral plane, this ethereal zone that's in between this world and the next world. But I'm not familiar with somebody being in that state for like 100 years or something like that. So how does that happen? How does somebody get stuck in that in-between state for that long? That's a little bit frightening, huh?
I know it's a little bit crazy. So I would ask, okay, so there's a lot of details, and I was thinking about this before this talk tonight, because it gets more complicated the more you delve in. But what happens is when we pass away, most people move fairly quickly through the astral planes into what I would call the heaven plane, where they sort of meet up with their soul. A small group of spirits get stuck. I would say maybe about 10%. Now, getting stuck has different meanings, and there's different places they get stuck. When they get stuck very close to the earth plane, it's usually because when they died, or their belief system is really just, they had no clue as to what's going to happen next. They also don't have a soul, perhaps, that's able to sort of grab down and pull them up into the light, into the tunnel. So they end up getting stuck. They could be in a drug state. People that commit suicide are often stuck in the lower astral. They could have suffered a lot of trauma when they passed away. And then they're in sort of like a fragmented state and they need help. Now, there's also other ways that people get stuck. And I was reading a little bit, I don't know much about your work or Jürgen's work, but another way that people get stuck is if they were particularly, how should I say, problematic in this lifetime. They will be in that problematic mind state when they move into the astral plane, and that can kind of be a sticking point. So that's another way they get stuck. And then finally, the way they get stuck is kind of interesting, which is if you have a very, very strong belief about where you're going to end up when you die, especially if you believe that you're going to go to a special heaven that is reserved just for people that share your beliefs, guess what? You end up in that astral heaven that looks a lot like what you think the place should be, which is it consists of people that share those same beliefs. And they all believe that they are in heaven, but actually they are slightly below heaven. And they're stuck there. And typically when I do retrievals, they're in the deepest planes. I want to say that it takes, when I ask to do a retrieval, I'm transported for about what seems, I've counted to be about 45 seconds. So I descend through a tunnel very, very deep down to, as you said, those middle regions between earth and the spirit. And a lot of times these people could have suffered trauma. They could be very scared. And it's very dark down there. And so they are the hardest to retrieve normally. And so therefore our work, our ability to provide light is very important.
And if I could just jump in real quick, because what I want to do is, well, first of all, I want to say that I understand exactly what you're saying, and I've had a couple of experiences doing something very similar to this as well in some instances, but I want to express my skeptical side in the sense that there's one issue that I have with this, and then maybe you can help explain it to me so that I can maybe dismiss that skeptical side. And that skeptical side involves, well, first of all, we use the terminology of being stuck. And yes, we can look at somebody in a condition like a hollow heaven or a lower astral plane, and to us, they are stuck. But it's kind of like in this world, if we see somebody who's homeless, living in a tent on Venice Boulevard in Los Angeles, and we think, oh, they're stuck because they're homeless. And then you go up to them, you find out that, well, in many ways, it's their choice to be having that lifestyle. So on a philosophical sense, sometimes, certainly there's situations with homeless people when they really are stuck, but there's also situations when that's like the life that they choose to be living. And so it seems to me in the astral conditions, to us, we may see somebody as being stuck, but to them, they're basically where they're comfortable being at based on their current journey, where they most psychologically are attuned to, okay? So that's the first thing. So the second thing that kind of, makes me curious about this is, given that we are dealing with complex psychological states, how do you rescue somebody from a particular psychological state. So if it's a psychological state that has somebody in a position where they're stuck, how does simply showing like, we're the rescue team and we're shining this light and we have all this positive energy, how is this not just like a short-term solution? Because if they're in a psychological state, again, we can look at this world to understand, I think, these topics the best. How do they not just go back into that state again? Same in this world when we try to help somebody, like those videos where they give, for example, a homeless person $10,000 or $100,000, and then they're all happy and they're going to get their life back in order again. And then, they follow their life, and then like 1 year later, like all the money is gone and they're homeless again, right? So do you see what I'm getting at? I know it's a lot of questions I'm throwing at you, but Deepa, is there a way we can link that together in some way?
Yes. Yeah. All right. So let's see. So the first thought I have is that your astral body is in fact borrowed from your soul. It is a personality that was created before you were born. And then when you're actually born, it starts to settle into that body and it becomes you. When you die, you can continue to contain that isolated personality as long as you so desire. And in fact, remember, when I do my retrievals, I ask to do a retrieval. I've gotten in trouble before for trying to retrieve people that I wasn't supposed to retrieve. So I agree with you in that sense. The people that I'm asked to retrieve are the people that, for whatever reason, the soul needs that personality back. What ends up happening is, if you continue to have lifetimes and you do not retrieve those astral personalities, you suck the energy out of your soul. And what you end up with is a situation where there's a lot of conflict and a lot of unresolved trauma. And I think a lot of spiritual illness is due to basically the accumulation of unresolved, as you said, psychological states, unresolved personalities. What happens is when I do a retrieval, I am actually getting the personality into a state where the soul can essentially just, it's like a vacuum cleaner, can take them right in. They're still free to be that personality. In fact, I've met all of my personalities before. They exist in what's called, I call it the soul level, which is, I consider to be above the heaven plane, but it's not really above, it's just a different plane. But they can continue to reside within the soul, and they can continue to be independent personalities, and they can continue to go through healing. But when they reside in the astral state, they're borrowing the energy that the soul needs to be able to reincarnate. So yeah, they can spend a certain amount of time. And as you said, there's a healing process and whatnot, but at some point they need to move forward. Otherwise, they're a drain. And as I also said, if I meet random astral inhabitants, I'm basically told leave them alone. But if I ask to do a retrieval and I end up in a location where there are astral inhabitants, I will assume that these people need to be retrieved, and I will retrieve them. There's some reasoning that they have as to why they asked me to retrieve who they asked me to retrieve, but I imagine it's a combination of urgency, prayer, and everything else that says that these people need to be.
Let me just hop in real quick. So actually, I think I understand what you're saying, and I'm going to translate that through like my perception, or what things I'm familiar with, which is basically, I think what you're saying is when it comes to soul retrievals, this is actually the only thing that makes sense to me. It's the only way to make sense of it based upon what I described previously, is that they basically, when someone is coming to help a person who's on a particular level of an astral plane, which we would perceive as being quite negative, and that they need to move out of that into a better condition, you're being assigned a particular person because that person is ready or wants to be saved. So if you go to somebody who is not ready, doesn't want it, and does not need help, then it's going to be the same analogy I used about a homeless person who just goes back to being homeless again. You're not actually able to have that effect. I think this is something that social workers would be very aware of, because to me, I mean, what this sounds like is we can put this spiritual terminology on top of it, but to me, it's basically social work. And so if someone is not ready to save themselves, if somebody is not ready to detox themselves from the drug they're addicted to, they're going to go back into that habit again. But if somebody is at a psychological point, a spiritual point, where they are receptive to being saved, receptive to receiving help, and then they're crying out. They're like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like where I am. How do I get out of this condition? I'm aware that this is not a great place to be. I need somebody to come and help me. They're crying out. Then there are organizations and systems in place that people hear that, and then they come in to actually pull the person out of that situation when now that they are willing and they're able to be helped. Does that make sense to you?
I would say that most cases could be like that. There are some cases where it's involuntary, and part of the reason it can be involuntary is sometimes I'm retrieving fragments that are basically look like they're dead. It's like because if they had suffered a major trauma, their astral body is actually just like, it's almost, here's another thing that's important to understand, is that when we pass away, we don't necessarily just have one astral body. If you suffer trauma in life, you can actually have multiple fragments scattered around the astral. It's crazy. And so a lot of times what I'm retrieving are fragments. These are energy bodies that are not completely, all there. They need to be reintegrated with where they came from. And ultimately, astral bodies, I know this is coming a little as a shock to you, but they're actually just projections of the soul. They're not, they don't really, it's impermanent. I also kind of have a beef against the astral boy. I've been projecting for 19 years. I find the astral to be full of misinformation is one way to think of it, but just a lot of people that are misguided and are just kind of stuck. Now,
well, yeah, I mean, it's a really, really mixed bag, just like on this planet.
There's even a smell. I mentioned on the Facebook post that when I smell somebody's breath in the astral, it has a very stinky smell to it. So it already puts me on a negative. In other words, it just doesn't seem like a place you want to spend. If you need to, as I agree, if you're in a very difficult psychological state and you need a reformation, absolutely 100% agree with you. But if you're somebody that's just basically going to just keep, hanging out in your hollow heaven, going to church every week, you're in a loop, and you're never going to get out of that loop until your soul basically calls up the helpline and says, we need this personality back. We need this energy back. So I agree with you that there is free will, and only a few people like me can disrupt that. But I also feel like the astral is not the endpoint that we should be aiming for, or even thinking about when we die. Like you're alive right now, and you should be aiming to be going to heaven when you die. You shouldn't be aiming. If you want to hang out in the astral and help out, that's fantastic, but you don't want to hang out there. It's low value. I find that the people, when I talk to there, they generally are not as with it. I can't have intelligent conversations as much. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's not hell, but it's just, and it is sort of like a limbo state. And here's I think the confusion for out-of-body explorers is that 99% of the time as an out-of-body explorer, you're going to see the astral state. You're not going to see the heaven state. So let me ask you, have you had an opportunity to move to sort of planes above the astral plane?
Well, the answer is yes, but I'm going to put a but or a conjunction here, because I think that there is a breakdown of terminology, right? So in my opinion, any state where you are in a, how do I say it? I would say, I mean, this is actually something Jurgen's been talking about, a physical existence in the sense that you're in a realm where you can reach down and you can pick up the dirt and you can pluck a blade of grass from the ground or smell a flower and walk around and the ground is solid and there's temples, castles, and civilization. I consider any type of realm like this to be, quote, astral by comparison to a purely mental realm, which would be, you wouldn't be able to do those things because then it's almost like you're data swimming through a data stream of, oftentimes, if you encounter based upon my research, entities in this higher level mental state, then it's very, very geometric. It's not like a solid civilization based realm of existence. It's a mental causal plane, right? And so my opinion is that, okay, there is what we might call a middle astral plane, which you're referring to because it's such a mixed bag of people. So I oftentimes talk about how silly it is that you'll see somebody, working at Astral Burger King, flipping astral hamburgers and going back to their astral one-bedroom apartment because, one, they're not really aware that they did die, and that, two, they don't really believe that there's anything better than like the life they were having here. So they go back to an equivalent on the astral earth, which is a civilization, just like this one, but people don't realize they can go to other places, right? And so if we then go to a, quote, higher place, which is maybe what you're referring to as heaven, it's still a civilization. It's still a planet. I would call it, actually, to use like yoga, Paramahansa Yogananda would literally call it like a planet, like it's an actual sphere of existence. Where, as opposed to Astral Burger Kings and, grungy urban areas, as well as very nice areas, just a middle astral plane. Again, it's like a mirror of this world. So there could be very beautiful places there as well, just like here. But you do finish real quick. So there's a higher astral level, which is, I would say, is still astral, but it's much, much more beautiful. And it's where I think like-minded people end up like refining their experience on a much, much more beautiful level that people experience. And I think this is often the kind of heaven state. And my belief about this is that we have all of these tangible levels of existence that are still in a universe, a tangible place. Then we have that intangible mental state. In my opinion, it all kind of works together. And like what I never do is I rarely say like one is absolutely better than the next. It all depends. Like, there's a purpose for that grungy middle astral where everyone's kind of like mixed together. There's a purpose for the very beautiful higher astral. There's a purpose for the mental level. Like it all works together. Like, I think it's the realm of religion sometimes when we say, well, one is tangibly better than the other, unless someone is stuck, unless someone's in a place that's literally bad and they don't want to be there, and then that's where they have to be rescued. Anyway, so I'll get off my soapbox. That's kind of like my perspective. What do you think?
I'm glad that we're having this discussion because this is I don't know if you know the author Gordon Finn, but he talks about in one of his books about how people in spirit often debate whether or not reincarnation exists. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, well, I've debated that with people in the astral plane. People are like, I had a life on Earth, and then, I don't know, because I don't think it was reincarnation because no one's ever offered for me to go back. I don't really want to go back. If there was reincarnation, I would have gone back. So, I've had discussions like that with people on the astral plane. So, yeah, I get where that's coming from.
So a question to ask. So the plane that I call the heaven plane, I use that as a name because it's familiar to the people that I'm retrieving. It's also known as Focus 27 in my, and one of the hallmarks of Focus 27 is the colors are more colorful, they're more saturated, and there's telepathy instead of talking. What is would you say that you've been in those realms where you could just look at somebody and they're just talking to you without moving their mouth?
Well, this is where I think some of these terminologies may break down a little bit, because I think instead of saying that there's this place, this place, this place, and I think what I'm saying here probably lines up a bit with Jurgen's discoveries. There's instead all these gray areas with different realms kind of interweaving in and out of each other. And I say this because in a lot of these astral plane conditions, I would say I have never, use a double negative, I have never not used telepathy, right? So even in realms that are a little bit urban, let's say astral Los Angeles, which has a very distinctive, it's a very distinctive environment. I often describe it as a little bit like golden age of Hollywood, 1920s meets modern day. So like they've constructed this version of their city, which kind of keeps, it's kind of like almost like the best interpretation of LA, but it still has all these sort of, negative elements too, depending on what, if you go to a bad neighborhood or not, right? But some people would interpret that, well, this must be this middle astral plane. And then like you say, people would be using physical language. It'd be really kind of, very, very similar to this world. But even if I'm there, if I meet somebody, like we might be talking verbally and communicating telepathically. And then there's like this mix of like telepathic verbal. And then some people you meet, they have the abilities that you'd find in a higher level, like maybe they can fly, they can teleport. And then other people you meet, they're like, well, I have no idea how to fly and how to teleport. And then if you fly or you teleport, like sometimes people will be like, wow, it's so cool, you could do that. And then for other people, like they're able to do it also. So it's weird because I guess in my experiences, I tend to find a lot of these concepts kind of mixed together. And then on that same note, Astral Los Angeles, there could be a section or even a building that has this higher vibration. And then like you said, begins to climb into that higher plane where the colors are brighter and I'm even more lucid, and you get this really great feeling to be around that in that place or around those people. But then you go to a bad neighborhood in astral Los Angeles, and then it's like you're descending downward into a lower plane, and the environment becomes grimier and the colors are less nice and it doesn't smell as nice and all of that. So it's like, in my experience, you can tell me if any of this relates to you or not. It's like we're kind of weaving in and out of these different planes of existence sometimes in one environment. So I know it's a complicated, I'm talking way too much, but what do you think?
No, it sounds to me like the way that you're experiencing the spirit world is actually fundamentally different than the way that I experience it. But I do have a few points of reference, which is years ago when I was doing retrievals, somebody had come up with the idea of creating a portal into the heaven plane. And so the concept is that right there in the astral, you could just create almost like a separation where if you walk past this line, you're in the heaven plane. And it sounds to me like you're able to sort of transition back and forth between what for me is usually extremely difficult to get into the heaven plane. But for you, it almost kind of blends together. And that's very fascinating. For me, there's a very clear distinction. When I can reach the top of the astral plane, I literally hit a ceiling. I can't go any further. And then to switch to the heaven plane, it's almost like I almost have to vaguely wake up before I can find myself in the heaven plane. And it's, as you said, it feels really good. There's telepathy. This is fascinating. I honestly I've never met anybody or even read about sort of this interchange between the two, but it sounds like that's what you're experiencing.
That's interesting. I guess there's this different, I don't know what the explanation may be, except I will say that, so there is the astral earth condition, which many people would call like a middle astral plane. And this is, I think, where I have the majority of my experiences. I do think that there are other like higher levels of that, which become less and less matching to this world, right? So if I'm in LA, there's a corresponding astral Los Angeles. But if you go to certain levels above that, it's going to become less and less Los Angeles-y, and it's going to start to look more and more higher astral dimension-y. So you're going to start to see crystal castles and cities made of
Yeah.
emerald and this kind of thing, which I don't have that much experience of. But in
So,
that situation, it is a very much tangibly like a different realm, as opposed
so
to the different gradients on the astral side.
yeah, I'm almost wondering if what you're experiencing is the upper astral, and not necessarily what I would call the heaven plane. So I find that the heaven plane is not gaudy at all. It's actually very, like you said, in a way it's Earth, but just a lot more tranquil and beautiful. The gaudiness I find is reminiscent of some of the higher astral planes where certain religions, they have the big cathedrals and it's almost like they think they're higher up because that's where they reside, but actually it really is highly misleading. It's for me, I feel much better in what I call the heaven plane. I find that people, when I talk to people in the heaven plane, I actually have a distinction, which is I ask people what my name is. And if they call me Michael, I know I'm in the astral. And if they call me by my soul name, which I can't even pronounce, then I know I'm in what I would think to be the heaven plane. I also agree with you that if you go beyond that state, there's really only a few other Earth-like states. One I call the soul level, which is where all your personalities hang out. And then I don't really have much experience beyond what I would call the heaven plane. But from what I've read, you're right. I don't think there's any physicality to it. I think you reach a point where it's more of thought forms and, just very ephemeral things. So the reason I make this, and we're talking about this too, is because you might say, well, so what I'm saying is that when a personality is in the heaven state, they're actually able to sort of reintegrate very easily with their soul so that they become sort of integrated again. If they're in the astral, though, there's still like a reason why they're there. They may believe that they're at their final place. There's something in their belief system that is incomplete, that they, as you said, they can spend as much time as they want, but they're not their whole self. They haven't reached the point where they remember that they are in fact are part of a greater being that in fact reincarnates. So that's sort of my distinction. I mean, it's my experience. I would say that it's fairly consistent with the sort of the Monroe levels. If you say focus 21 to 26 is astral, 27 is this. It's actually, they call it the park, or sort of the meeting place, and that I would agree. Heaven is a Zoom meeting. It's not an actual place that souls hang out. It's simply a place where souls meet each other and talk to each other. Souls actually hang out in themselves. Souls are emanations of yet larger souls. So, but when they want to communicate with each other and talk to each other, they meet in the heaven plane. It's sort of like it's just a common meeting ground. And a lot of times, if you look for somebody that passed away, you may not find them at all because they may not be in that meeting spot. People may know who you're talking about, but they may be not available for communication.
It's a lot to figure out. But before we turn it over to see if any of the patrons want to ask you any questions, I want to ask you real quick, because we've been going on about kind of this one subject for a while, which is great. That'll be the theme of the show, of course. But I wanted to at least ask you, is there a memorable out-of-body experience that you had in a particular environment, maybe that doesn't just involve the soul retrievals, like a place you went to, a person you met, an entity that you met that you'd like to share and talk about real quick?
So I think one thing I'll suggest, throw out there is, at times I have met entities that I didn't believe it myself that look like angels. They're taller. They emit almost like a tone, and their name is usually something like a single word, like mercy or grace. And I just found that to be very fascinating, because I wasn't somebody who necessarily believed that angels existed. But after those experiences, I realized that there's sort of, think of angels as sysadmins of the spirit world. They have an ability to do certain things for certain rescue situations that are very difficult. They can act as protectors. They can offer advice to people while they're dreaming. But they are definitely an interesting entity, I would say, that I've met on the positive side. On the negative side, I've met spirits that are really good at trapping other spirits. I call them demons. They're basically spirits that make their own heaven or hell or whatever you want to call it, and trap a bunch of other spirits and think they're just next to God. But really, they're just astral inhabitants that have gotten really used to their surroundings.
Astral narcissists.
Astral narcissists, great term. Yes, they just love it. They love it there, and they love fooling other people into sticking around.
And I mean that's the ongoing pattern of like hollow heavens and things like that, is that you end up with basically cults on that side. You end up with figureheads, you end up with symbols of power. And in my opinion, that's also where people have to be really, really careful, because you may end up in a system controlled by some astral narcissist who you fall into their pattern. They're saying this is the way reality is. You have to follow what I say and my teachings, and this is our temple. Look how glorious and, to use your word, gaudy it is. So clearly we're in heaven. And now that you're following all of our teachings, do what I say. It's time for you to reincarnate. So we're going to make sure you come back to Earth, and then you continue to serve us, and you follow this little kind of soul contract we made for you, and keep you ensnared into a system on and on and on and on, because you've chosen to sign up with this bunch of weirdos. And I think that's big.
And they're very powerful. I mean, they even trap me sometimes. So not so much fooling me, but they just have an incredible energy. I don't belittle their power. And they are certainly a force to be reckoned with.
And that's another big concept that people don't always know about, because they think, well, an entity who's not just behaving as pure love and light and joy and bliss and Abraham Hicksville is going to be a lower entity, which therefore means they have no power, right? But that's actually not the case at all. It turns out that you can be a higher dimensional sort of negative or narcissistic entity, yet have higher dimensional power. That's also something that I've discovered as well. And so so even though that's just
it's a skill set that you develop over time, and if your mental state retains that level, you just keep developing it better and better. So I wouldn't say that I would say that they're all human. I mean, there may be some aliens in there too, but I would say that most of these scary individuals were just like us ones.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's a really big lesson, because people often think of this oil and water concept. It's like, well, you're on the other side and you're developing in this way, or you're in this type of dimension, then you must automatically be, completely free of what we think of as human psychology. And now you're a higher dimensional being who's made of pure love and light, blah, blah, blah. So we have this oil water concept, and it turns out, when you delve into this, when you talk to people like you, talk to actually many people in this field, and not just the sort of new age spectrum, when you go outside of that and get objective information, it starts to seem a lot like that's not the case. It's not an oil water thing. It's that somebody can be on the other side and, quote, evolved, higher dimensional. They can do all this stuff and use telepathy and fly around and project themselves in places, yet have the human psychological condition where they may still want to control, manipulate, and all of these elements. Which is, it's not it's shades of gray. I mean, it's more like shades of gray. It's not good versus bad. Just like here, people
that for the most part, our physical elements disappear, but our mental elements remain. Yep.
And that's I think a big lesson also, just because again people I mean, honestly, because it is terrifying, right? It's terrifying to think that because here the most terrifying thing I think is human psychology. You go out the door, you don't know what you're going to experience, because so many people are just on a completely different page, which is sometimes really destructive. And that's the most terrifying thing here. And so I think it causes people a lot of fear to think that, the most terrifying thing here maybe still is happening over there.
I think, yeah, and I think that it's going to take, we are so, as a society, we are so unknowledgeable of what's going on in the spirit world that it's going to be difficult. But certainly people like us who have lots of experience there, I think we can defend ourselves. And also you have to trust that there's a team of spirits that are looking out for you. And if you pray or whatever, you can get help. The other thing I just want to mention real quick is that, like, people that commit suicide, the thing that happens to them is they often keep committing suicide in the spirit world, which is silly because they can't kill themselves. So,
well, I do want to jump in and intervene a little bit on that note, because yes, I understand if someone's intention is to not exist, and then they end their incarnation here with the intention of not existing. They find they still exist. They can be trying to do that again and again in some lower plane. So yes, that could happen, and they need help. But of course, I have to be very sensitive about this subject and let people know that
we're suffering.
Finish. Yeah, if someone takes their life because specifically conditions here are not suitable for them, then that is not the case. So if someone is sick, or just, in a psychological condition which absolutely will not persist into the other side, then they will be perfectly fine on the other side. But, there's certain situations with certain people who take their lives here because there's these reasons behind it, which it leaves them very, in a very vulnerable condition on the other side, especially if it's motivated by like a wish to not exist again. So there's many very different, there's many very different situations with suicide, but so sometimes it's perfectly fine, but sometimes it's a situation that is, very, it could be very negative. So it depends, right? I'm sure you agree with me, though. It's just,
yeah. I mean, the thing is that when you do enter the spirit world, you can get help, and people do get help. And precisely why people like me exist is that we will help you and move forward. And so it's not, the only reason I mention that is that mental issues don't magically resolve themselves. This is something I've been learning. For better or for worse, they don't resolve themselves instantaneously. There is a healing time, and there's plenty of spirits over there that can help heal people when they go over there.
Yeah, and that's been a major theme, actually. In like my work and my books, or this YouTube channel has been that point. And then some people have really resisted that idea. I mean, that's the reason. I've gotten a lot of like really hateful emails from people saying that, Cyrus, I really dislike your work because you imply that when we cross over, we're still ourselves, or that if I have impulsive issues in this life, that it doesn't go away after I become pure, formless love and light energy, because I read this New Age book that says this is what happens to us. And they're really banking on that because they want anything that's imperfect about themselves to disappear when they cross over. But unfortunately,
it can be healed. Let's give it this way. With the proper assistance, people can be healed. It won't last very long. It's a lot easier to heal an energy body than it is to heal a physical body. So it can be helped, but it's a difficult issue, and we don't know for sure. I mean, the experiences that I have may be the outliers. It might be that the few people that I see that have committed suicide are the ones that are really stuck and they keep committing suicide, but most suicides are perfectly fine. The people are greeted by helpers, they move on, and there's no issues.
I think that it's really complicated. I think that the conditions vary, but ultimately, I mean, the other side, as long as you're aware that it's the other side, and then you want to improve yourself, then you're in a condition on the other side where a psychological issue can be worked out probably better than it can here. But if you're somebody like my father, for example, on the other side, who's so stuck in his ways, he's not in some lower plane, but he was a massive narcissist. And upon meeting, hanging out with him on the astral side, and also communicating through mediums with him, I mean, he's a massive narcissist on that side. And because he doesn't have any intention to change. And
okay, now I understand your perspective. I would agree with you that, if you're not ready to give up who you are, then you don't have to. I mean, you take as long as you like when you're in the spirit world. But I understand, that some people just are not willing to give up their ego. And when you do leave the astral, it is called the second death. Your personality is subsumed into the greater self that you are. And so there is a sort of disappearance of that ego, at least at the level of that one personality. So when it's time and you're ready, you do it. In the meantime, hang out as long as you like in the astral. They got plenty of cookies. That's my favorite thing.
Well, I think it's a very complicated subject because because actually literature about the spirit world, it talks about the second death, quite a bit, even literally involving an astral body going into almost like a coma state. And then you have a higher level energy body that goes into a different plane, kind of like here. It's interesting. But in regard to that, I am aware that based upon my own experiences, my own opinion, or things I've researched, is that if you are joining with basically when you become aware of your many different facets, or how your personality here is a small piece of, it's 1% of the rest of you, and when you go back to that 99%, you are substantially different. But I also find it to be, number one, is that the essence of who you are bleeds through into any incarnation, any element of personality. So you'll always get that essence of Michael, that essence of Cyrus, the essence of Deanna.
Exactly.
You get that essence coming through no matter who, what level it's on. And so people get confused because they'll think this is the thing that gets extinguished, which also causes people anxiety. And so I don't, I like to point out.
Absolutely. I'm actually more worried about my soul death, because at some point when souls advance sufficiently, they actually start merging with other souls, and they start losing that identity that of a unique soul. So talk about anxiety, it never ends, because at some point our energy, even our soul energy, is borrowed from yet a higher soul.
But here's the reason that I don't have anxiety about that, and maybe I would disagree just a little bit with the concept as you just laid it out, because I think, and it's just my opinion, totally can disagree with me, but I think that you're thinking of the process in a very linear way, where you think that you're Michael here, and then you're Michael for X amount of time, and then you start becoming Michael and his 20 other incarnations, and you forget about being Michael, because now you are the Chinese guy that you were 2,000 years ago and 20 other people. And then you're this greater personality, and then at this time, now you're joining the soul level, then you're merging into a upper soul group, and then you're this, and you're this, and you're this, and you're this. The way I see it is that we're already all those points, and then we are already on the source consciousness level. And since time is not linear, we're all those things already. And if you're, quote, merging into source consciousness, all you're doing is being aware of a condition that you're already in. And then from being in that condition that you're already a part of, you can be any micro level condition that you want to be, including Michael, who's just Michael, who is not the Chinese guy or those 20 other personalities, and is not on a greater level. So it's not like you go from point A to B to C to D. It's more like you're just aware of being on that higher level, and then you can move between any level you want, any time you want, and instead of being things cut in stone like that. And so I'd just be like, personally, I'd be cautious of systems or beliefs. This is just my opinion. This is how I navigate this stuff. I'd be cautious of systems or beliefs that say we're going to go from here to here to here, and at this point you have to give up everything you are and then move into this point, because even just setting the intention out could actually create a system like that when it's not really the.
Well, I understand your concept of nonlinearity. Seth talks a lot about this idea that we're all personalities at once and stuff like that. I will say though that everything is a conscious decision, and I think that ego is something that we grapple with. You know, we have this identity. I don't think you want to stop being Cyrus, right? And I don't want to stop being Michael. And I think that that's something that we all grapple with. And when we're ready, we make that merger. Until then, we can be this forever. And of course, we always have, I like to think of the soul is almost like a hard drive. It stores all of our personalities. And I would also agree with you that I've seen future personalities, which is to say that we are everywhere and every time at once, depending on where we're experiencing it. Okay.
So with that, I think we should go ahead and open up. We have a few patrons in the audience to ask questions if they have questions. But real quick, before we open up to patrons, I do want to say that if you like watching videos like this, where a disheveled, unshaven Cyrus early in the morning in Asia interviews prim and proper guests in the evening time in America, then please subscribe to this channel. Go down, hit the subscribe button, like this video, share the video if you think other people may benefit from it. All that really helps. If you want to get involved and become a patron and go behind the scenes with guests like Michael, then you can become a patron at patreon.com/Afterlife Topics. Helps keep this channel going, the group going, all the work I put into it. So any help with that area is always appreciated. With that said, I'm going to ask if we have any questions for Michael. So if you do, go ahead and just, you can raise your hand in the video screen. I'll see you, or just jump in and say something. So I know there's like 3 of you guys in the chat. Does anybody have any questions for Michael? Deanna wants to go. Hey, Deanna.
Hey, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. My head is like blown apart in a good way. It's fantastic. So, okay, so there's so many questions, but the suicide, committing suicide over and over. So are they, I mean, I'm getting an image of like What Dreams May Come. Did we all see that? The movie where she she creates this underworld for herself that she can't quite get out of. I mean, are we talking that kind of thing where they're living and creating their own structure that they're sort of imprisoned in and they keep having to like try to get out of it by suicide?
Yeah, there's no hard and fast rules. The few times that I remember retrieving somebody was committing suicide, it wasn't so much, they could have been trapped in a world that they created for themselves. But I would say that they probably had created an image of where they were when they committed suicide. And so they're sort of just in a memory loop where they're kind of repeating that same event. And this may only be a fragment of them. It may be that most of their self has moved on, but this particular fragment, this particular memory has kind of continued. And then it's up to the helpers to kind of get this energy, reformed and back to the soul. So it's just interesting that they seem to play out the suicide as though as Cyrus is saying, they're still trying to look for that non-existence, and they're just not achieving it.
Do you witness the part where they merge back, or how far do you get to be involved in the process?
So that's a great question. If I make it to heaven, which I didn't do originally, but I one time asked a helper to take me with them, and so I got to experience it and got to see it. I don't usually see any particular mergers. When I find myself in heaven, it's almost like the time has been accelerated, and I see them sort of now in their what I would call like soul state. So, but if I remain in the astral and they leave, it's almost as though the energy is sucked away from whoever they were. Either the whole form moves away, or it just becomes inanimate. The person doesn't hang around by any shot. I guess what I'm saying. Let's see. So it's when they come. I don't really see the reunions that much. I have to admit, I don't. I speak to the helpers and talk to them about what happened, but I don't usually see the reunions that occur, and that could take time to happen. I think they go through a big in process where they meet with social workers. They talk about, what happened. They ask, are you ready to merge with your soul self, that kind of thing.
So you're sort of the thing that shakes them out of the pattern and helps them move into this next stage.
Yeah. So it could just be providing a light, which then a helper steps in. I could actually carry them up the subplanes into the heaven plane. There's a variety of things that we can do, but the main thing is getting them to stop that pattern long enough to pay attention to me or someone else. And it could also be actually just transporting them. Depends.
That's amazing. And you just show up there. You just show up. You go into the astral.
Actually, it can take up to 45 seconds from the point at which I request to do a retrieval to actually end up in the place that I need to be. So they have to create a tunnel between me and the location. I've actually seen the astral from the outside. It looks like a lot of black bubbles. And so it's a very complicated index system that they have. And they keep track of everybody. And when the time is right, then they dive in and work with that person.
It's amazing. Okay.
Yeah, pretty cool.
I'll let somebody else ask. That's amazing.
Yeah, you're welcome. Oh, hi, Teresa.
Hello. I know quite a few people that have interdimensional relationships on the astral with loved ones that have passed away. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on interdimensional relationships.
Yeah, I generally speaking, most of my friends or loved ones that have passed away, I might see them from time to time in the beginning when they first pass away, but eventually they're gone. I mean, they've moved on. So I don't have any particular relationships or ongoing relationships, even friendships or whatever. I will say that probably we'll leave it to another show or whatever, but I'm working on communication with the spirit world, and that really could transform the way that we interact with our loved ones there. It would, because right now it's very difficult, right? You got to project and ask to visit them. It's a whole process. So the idea of being able to just turn on your system and just start talking to them, well, of course, some people have the gift of mediumship, so that works too.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have anything they want to ask?
I just had a real quick question. This is Dee.
Yeah, Dee.
Are you familiar, Michael, with Sonia Rinaldi's work? Do you have a comment on that?
She has been the world leader in this area for as long as I've known about ITC. I've been starting to work on my own stuff in the last year, and there's sort of an intermediate person, Keith Clark, that I think Cyrus has had on the show before, and he said that some of the stuff I'm doing is sort of a different angle of exploring some of these, of how to do communication. But yeah, her work is pretty amazing, especially that she opens it up to sort of help people, where people can visit and have communication. That's very amazing.
And if everybody just if everybody just moves on, like you're saying, then I don't think Sonia's work would be able to work, because she has deceased loved ones like waving at the camera and saying hello to everybody, and this is even years after they passed on.
So there's something very interesting. In the last year, I've been doing this work, and the people that are coming through died 30 years ago. I think what I'm accessing, and I think Sonia is able to do this too, is we're basically able to access the personalities that now reside within souls. Basically, a personality will come out of that soul level, come and visit, or pick up a phone, and they will actually communicate through these devices. I know it's crazy. The people that have come through, I have a great-great-grandmother that comes through a lot. It doesn't make any sense to me. Because in my astral and experiences, I don't see people beyond, say, a year after they've died. So I think what I'm accessing is basically what I would call the soul level state, that people are basically checking in from the soul. they used a term that really just blew me away. They said they're in a cell. It's hard to explain, but they use terms like circle, which would describe like a soul level state. So I think these are states that are inaccessible to us explorers, but they also talk about being incarnated. So basically, they're talking to us, but there's actually a part of them that's currently incarnated in a new physical body. So once again, we never lose these personalities. They're there forever. But only through ITC have I ever gotten evidence that they're still doing well. And of course, through my own experience, I've met some of my previous personalities, but I sure as heck have never met previous personalities of other people. So this is pretty crazy stuff. And so I don't think it's what's the word? I don't think it's incongruous. I think there's actually a possibility that this could be happening.
Well, it's just weird because you have very different experiences from me, frankly, because I've never had like, I've maintained sort of relationships with numerous deceased people on this level that we're kind of calling astral level. But I find in my experiences, none of these things that you're saying actually impedes with interaction with anybody on that side. Even if somebody is coming into awareness of a higher self or, their greater personality or different incarnations they've had, like to me, just like none of that impedes on anything. In my experience, I mean, there's people living in an astral Los Angeles who've been there for 80 plus years. And there's actors who are still acting, in that setting who were actors like 100 years ago. We had somebody in the group who had a really interesting experience with meeting Lucille Ball in the same astral Los Angeles environment. And so I think that there is a school of thought that maybe it's something that you're coming from a little bit, but I also see this kind of in Tom Campbell's work that it kind of repeatedly argues that, all of this has to be separated from the individual, whoever you once knew, that they're part of some giant computer algorithm now, and then that a little piece of the algorithm comes down, and then that temporarily manifests as the person you once knew. I just don't see it that way. I see it as like even if you're part of a greater soul, you can have a totally rich, vibrant life on whatever realm as the person you once were. This is why so many mediums communicate like people's deceased loved ones, that they're pursuing this hobby and that they're on the other side, astral fly fishing or whatever it is. I don't see those accounts or what the mediums talk about in regard to our loved ones. I don't see that as some kind of illusion or that it's just some kind of temporary thing they're showing us, or it's not actually what's happening. And I think that with the ITC work with Rinaldi, from what they allegedly say, and all of it's alleged, we can't say any of this stuff, for sure, but basically they're saying, they're literally going to a station set up by Nikola Tesla, who's still Nikola Tesla, working with this guy Rodiv, the German ITC pioneer, and literally a soul will come into that station and literally sit on a chair and then get themselves scanned by their devices and then sent through the transmission into the screen, and that's how Rinaldi gets the image. So I just think that there's some kind of a breakdown happening of trying to comprehend these concepts, and then what ends up happening is I think important things get skipped or misinterpreted, and that misinterpretation creates a picture that maybe isn't quite the way it really is. So that's my perspective. That's where I'm coming from. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, so the way that my colleague in IT describes it is that they're in what's called the fourth level. And in my opinion, the fourth level is the soul level. So I think that what happens is that personalities never disappear, but they're in a realm where they can just do nothing, or they can do something. It's their choice. They never disappear. They still can be animated. Actually, they act as our guides. That's an interesting point. Because originally when I used to ask for guides, it turned out a lot of times they were just previous lifetimes visiting me in the astral. I think that the astral is not some place you hang out long term, but it is a place you can visit. You can project your energy down into it. I think that what Sonia's talking to are people that are actually residing within their soul level, but then can sort of communicate with each other, perhaps on the heaven plane, and do what they want to do. I mean, the one thing I'll say is that my loved ones, when I go look for them, I can't find them. You know, and I don't know if you have that experience too, but you know, when I had one friend I saw for about a year. My brother and my dad, who passed away a few years ago, my brother went quick, and I saw maybe my dad once or twice. I mean, they just move quick. And by moving quick, I mean, I feel like they have chosen to not be accessible in the planes that I can access. That doesn't mean they're still not there. It's just that I can't.
Do you think it's an accessibility issue? Because you also mentioned like you haven't heard of many people describing like how I describe it, like weaving in and out of places. And do you think that maybe there's something going on with like with my experiences where I have in some weird way like more accessibility? Because
yes, it is very likely that you could have access to more energy bodies than I do. I think my mental state is such that heaven is very difficult for me to get to, and I don't stay there very long. And it's very possible that other states, even when I say higher, I just mean more, whatever you want to call it. I just may not be accessing them. So you may be experiencing sort of a greater reality than I'm able to experience. But I will say that a lot of people that do OBEs typically can't get past the astral. So I think that you have quite a gift there. And I think Jürgen, if he talks himself as a multidimensional person, it's very possible he has that gift too, to access much higher states.
I think that's what's happening. I think Jürgen is like a kind of a master of that. I mean, he's many levels above me, and he can really weave between places, but he has no issues with his deceased loved ones, like with his mother on that side and you know, multiple levels. But I do think it's really interesting because I think, you know, we were kind of chipping at that wall long enough, and then finally like we broke through and discovered something.
Yeah.
I think there may be something like that going on. Like even with my experiences, maybe I'm not even fully aware of the fact, but there is like this greater accessibility. And then that's why I've never not been able to contact anyone who is deceased, right? So it could literally be anyone. I mean, I could have experiences with, as well as people who are not deceased, right? So somebody who's like living here, incarnated here, and having parallel lives on other planes. And so then I will see them as well. And
yeah,
then
I do see living people too. Yeah.
Got it. And
so that is possible on the planes that I'm able to access, but it's very possible you're going even higher.
And then what's interesting then about that is that the idea that I could be doing that and yet also not aware of it. So I could be talking about, you know, my experiences and not even fully understanding that that's the place I'm coming from, and then trying to figure out like, yes, why are your experiences different from mine? Because I'm not even aware of that fact. And I think that's also kind of interesting. But,
yeah, it does take, I believe, like an integration, sort of like an information transfer from what we call higher bodies. They're not really higher, but from different energy bodies down into our physical brain. There could be several links, and if you miss some of the links, then you just lose that information, or it doesn't come into our physical.
Because also, like you said earlier, it's like I think there's so many of these different levels. There's different astral bodies on different levels, sometimes fragmented all over the place, and then astral travel is actually you navigating all these different wavelengths, different planes. Every plane of reality looks physical, feels real. You can smell the air. You can touch the walls. You can pick up the grass, and then you can switch to a different reality, and then you can breathe the air and touch the grass and touch the walls. But now it's a different whole spectrum, and there could be different versions of people on that spectrum linked to the same thing. And so we go into the topic of like multidimensionality. That is the ability to access all these different planes. And I think the greater the multidimensional kind of like access you have, and to get to that point, I don't know, maybe it like takes meditation, or I don't know, but Jürgen would definitely argue that meditation would be a key to getting.
Well, that's good to know. I think that the ITC for me is accessing levels that I wasn't able to access by myself. So it's really opened my eyes. I really thought that you know, I wasn't going to be able to talk to loved ones anymore, and I find that my electronics can. So it sounds to me, and I'm pretty sure I know about this about myself, that there's just some blocks. And I think a lot of people, I'm extremely lucky in what I can access, and you're even perhaps more lucky, but most people just don't have access to these kinds of things.
And as a talented medium can just use their mind to immediately access somebody, and that's why mediums a real medium can can straight away connect to somebody. And so that even if you're not able to connect with them astrally because there's some kind of a block, like a really good medium can connect right in, which proves, that they're still around, even if they're in a different wavelength that for some reason that you're not able to penetrate through. But like with my experiences, like I would meet my mom someplace in a very specific condition, and then I would talk to a medium. It's like, yeah, your mom is talking about the time you saw her at XYZ, like the exact place I went to. So, corroborating those things together that I actually literally went to where they were.
It's all real, and I think that your experience is fairly unique, but it also, I consider it almost like a Rosetta Stone in a way, that can help us sort of understand what most people are seeing and then seeing the bigger picture. And I think Jürgen also. And maybe this is something to aspire to. I'd never even read about it. So to be able to aspire to reaching these levels is something that, explorers ought to do. It's really cool.
And I also think, for that matter, Swedenborg, the original out-of-body traveler, I think that he also, similar to Jürgen, also had these same abilities. But he sometimes had to put things through the lens of religion a bit to be able to sell his ideas to 1700s Protestants. But it was kind of the same deal. But anyway, that's a lot of it's definitely a lot to digest. I think that we definitely hit on something on this interview, which I think will be of maybe direct benefit to people listening who maybe got through the first middle part and really maybe feeling a little bit like unsure or confused. But if you guys stayed around to this kind of final part, I think maybe we clarified something, especially for people having difficult time reaching their deceased loved ones and wondering why there might be a block there. I think it does depend on your sort of like multidimensional capability. And then that doesn't mean that they're gone. It means that maybe something has to be expanded to be able to reach them. But then the thing about like ITC is that they kind of come to us from wherever they're at, and then you can make very quick contact, whether it's EVP, ITC, and things like that, like with Rinaldi's work. And so that can transcend whatever those boundaries are, because now it's kind of like the onus is on them to come to us, I suppose, and then they're able to.
ITC is going. When it becomes clear and whatnot, it's going to really give an opportunity for people, because right now we are limited to some very good mediums out there, and the few of us that really do a lot of astral exploring. It's going to open it up to a lot larger audience, and it's hopefully it'll have a positive effect on the world.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely in developing that way. Okay, so we're just about out of time, but since we did go on a bunch of new topics, I do want to ask the patrons again if there was anything else they wanted to ask before we finish up.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, Teresa.
Dr. Michael was saying that we have multiple selves over there, and brought on by traumas. So if a person, let's say, has had many traumas, so they would be broken. Their different selves and aspects of their personalities would be broken off into fragments. Just wanted to know more clarification on that.
Yeah, so their fragments will reside individually in the astral, but over time, through helpers and perhaps just through the magic of the way that things do reintegrate over time, they will become whole again. It's the way to look at it is that when we die, we no longer have that unifying physical body that's holding together these different pieces of energy. And so they just kind of go off into their own place. But we work on that. That's what retrievers and helpers do, is we try to get these fragments back whole.
Awesome.
So, yeah. It's fascinating and scary at the same time. Scary in the sense that, just because you die doesn't solve everything right away. It takes time.
And would you say, I'm sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I believe that as well, that when we pass, we still have work to do on the other side. We're not just going to be automatically love and light, and floating around like an orb.
Yeah,
So
no,
that's
it's a process, and
mm,
but yeah, it's look, it compared to the alternative, which is eternal damnation. This isn't that bad.
exactly.
This is really a positive thing. It's
It is.
as Cyrus says, it's free will. It's the
Mm.
free will ability to heal, which is wonderful.
And what's interesting about the integration thing is, well, like my mom told me that it's possible for, she said she can be in like 4 places at once. And that she said that with my human brain, it would be impossible for me to comprehend it. And so I asked her, like, what are some elements of your side? And she's like, oh, I can't even tell you because you wouldn't even be able to understand if I tried to tell you. And I'm like, go ahead and try me. And she's like, well, I can be in 4 places at once. And I said, well, that's not too weird. I'm saying because I've done the same thing astrally, and I equated it to like using the Alt-Tab function on a computer, like going between different windows. Like I'm here, except you're doing it all at once, right? But in general, though, when it comes to like fragmentation, it is better to be unified. Is kind of what I'm getting from you, right? If it's like a personality fragment, kind of like I think we might see like manifested as like mental illness even on this side of someone's mind. It's like here.
See, once you're integrated, you can go back into the astral, but it's voluntary and it's completely controlled. I've done it before where I was in the heaven plane and then I was catapulted back into the astral. You are literally spring loaded like a rubber band. You will pop right back when you're done doing what it is you want to do. So
wow.
the difference between a strong connection and almost instant reintegration, and one where you've lost your way and they're looking for you, or they know where you are, but you're just not ready to come back. So yeah, fragmentation is perfectly cool once you've already reintegrated.
And so kind of the main idea, and tell me if this is correct, Michael, before we finish up. The healthiest thing to do in life then is to integrate with, the complete picture of who you are, and then once you've integrated, go back and decide where you're going to go. Am I going to go live in my astral house? Am I going to go to a different planet? Am I going to go in this upper plane? Am I going to, go, play basketball down in astral Los Angeles? Like you decide what you want to do, but after you integrated yourself, so you're not like all these amnesic pieces of yourself all over the place. Is that right?
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, we can't control what happens in our physical life, but unless you do meditation or you see mediums, there are mediums that can actually help you reintegrate. Truth be told, in a way, we're fragmented. We often have lots of past life fragments that need to be retrieved to make us whole again. So it may not even be in this lifetime that's causing us problems. Integration is cool, but we always retain our identity. So that's a great way to summarize it.
And that probably also clarifies the weird element as well in terms of, how is it that people on the astral plane, well, I think on the astral level, there's a combination of people who are integrated and people who are not integrated, right?
Yes.
So when on the astral Los Angeles, like we had the one forum member who met Lucille Ball, he was pursuing acting and wanted to talk to actors and get some inspiration. He went to actually like a mixer, a party in LA, and then met up with Lucille Ball and some other actors there. How can somebody who's like a veteran spirit still be Lucille Ball and still be doing this in Los Angeles? Probably she did integrate. She is of this higher self collective, but then she just, like you said, springboarded from that point to be back to Lucille Ball again in Los Angeles, as opposed to being just Lucille Ball with no awareness of anything else. Like it's an integrated spirit, integrated person, I guess. That's, I guess, the way to put it, but it's, it's complicated stuff.
I mean, sometimes when I see a celebrity in the astral, they're perfectly fine. And sometimes they need to be retrieved. You kind of can tell by their mood almost, what they are.
Okay, well, with that, I guess we're going to wrap up. So thank you, Michael. It's a lot to digest. Hopefully it's a lot for people watching to digest and think about.
Yeah,
probably we could take each topic and then expand it out into many, 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 many subtopics. And things like it actually just continues and continues. You take anything we talked about, just go on and on and on and on and on. So we don't want to do that all night. But so all right, well, everybody, thanks for coming out, and thank you, Michael, for joining us, and thank you, people, for watching, and thank you, patrons. With that said, thanks for watching Afterlife. Excuse me. Thank you for watching Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. I hope that wherever you are watching, that you stay integrated and keep working on yourselves, and self-development, I think, is always the way to go in life, regardless. And with that said, I guess I'll see you guys next time. I'm going to leave the chat. It's going to be open if people just want to hang out. As always, you're welcome just to hang out the chat, but I'm going to get going. So I'll catch you guys next time.